Sometimes betrayal doesn't come with thunderclaps or lightning bolts. It tiptoes in quietly, wearing the mask of ordinary days. My name is Sarah Michelle Thompson, born and raised in Akron, Ohio. I was the middle child of 3 daughters in a working-class family. Please hit the subscribe button, like, and comment. I had met Marcus during my final year of nursing school at a coffee shop near campus. He was already working in insurance sales and pursuing his business degree part-time. What attracted me initially was his apparent stability and maturity. He seemed like someone who knew what he wanted from life and was working steadily toward his goals. Our courtship was traditional and romantic. Marcus was attentive without being overwhelming, ambitious without being ruthless, and demonstrated what appeared to be strong family values. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, I felt confident that I was choosing a partner who shared my commitment to building a life based on mutual respect and honesty. I was 34, the kind of woman who believed in the simple pleasures of life. A part-time nurse at Cleveland General Hospital. Thompson, 36, worked as a senior accounts manager at a mid-sized insurance firm downtown. With his carefully maintained beard and warm brown eyes, he had the kind of dependable appearance that made clients trust him implicitly. Marcus was supportive of my demanding career, helping with household duties when Elle worked double shifts and celebrating my professional achievements. We bought our house in Lakewood together, adopted Whiskers from a local realtor, and talked about starting a family once we were more financially stable. The early years of our marriage, that the autumn sun filtered through the oak trees lining Maple Street in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, casting dancing shadows across the Thompson family's modest 2-story home. Inside, the living room was bathed in golden light, creating the perfect atmosphere for what I had hoped would be a peaceful Saturday afternoon with my husband of 7 years. Today he wore his favorite weekend uniform, a faded Cleveland Browns t-shirt and comfortable jeans, his arm draped casually around me as Elle settled against him. I lay on the couch with my head resting comfortably on my husband Marcus's lap. He stroked my hair while we half-watched a movie playing on Netflix. "I love this part," I murmured, referring to the scene where Andy Dufresne first arrives at Shawshank. "The way hope survives even in the darkest places." Marcus smiled down at me, his fingers still gently stroking my hair. "You always find the deeper meaning in everything, don't you?" Our cat, Whiskers, an orange tabby we'd rescued 3 years ago, had claimed the armchair across from us, purring contentedly in a patch of sunlight. The house smelled faintly of the apple cinnamon candles Elle loved to burn on weekends, mixed with the lingering aroma of the pancakes Marcus had made that morning. This was our routine, our sanctuary. After a busy week, pulling double shifts at the hospital and Marcus dealing with increasingly demanding clients, Saturday afternoons were sacred. No phones, no work talk, just the two of us reconnecting in the comfort of our shared space. I had been looking forward to this particular Saturday more than usual. We'd been having some rough patches lately. Nothing major, just the typical stresses of married life compounded by financial pressures and busy schedules. Marcus had seemed distant the past few weeks, often working late or claiming to meet clients for drinks after work. But today felt different. Today felt like old times. "Remember when we first moved in here?" I asked, my voice drowsy with contentment. "We couldn't even afford a couch, so we watched movies sitting on those folding chairs your mom gave us. And you insisted on making popcorn in that ancient pot because we couldn't afford a microwave," Marcus replied, his voice warm with memory. "Half of it burned, but you said it gave it character." We both laughed, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. The kind of perfect that makes you believe in forever, in the promises you make at altars and in quiet moments just like this one. That's when Marcus's phone rang. The first lie. The sharp trill of Marcus's iPhone cut through our peaceful bubble like a knife. Sarah felt him tense beneath me, his hand pausing in me hair. The caller ID flagged, Tony's Auto Repair. Marcus glanced at the screen and Elle noticed a flicker of something. Annoyance? Anxiety? Cross his features before he answered with practiced casual ease. "Hello? Yeah, hey Tony." Marcus's voice took on that particular tone he used with service providers. Friendly but professional. "Oh really? That's great news." I lifted my head slightly, curious but not yet concerned. Marcus had mentioned taking the car to Tony's shop a few times over the years for routine maintenance, though I couldn't remember him mentioning any recent issues with our 2018 Honda Accord. "Yes, the car is working perfectly well," Marcus continued, his free hand absently rubbing my shoulder. I'll come later for you to confirm around 5 p.m. As he ended the call, Al sat up fully, a small crease forming between the eyebrows. Car? I didn't know there were any issues. Marcus set his phone face down on the coffee table. A gesture I would later remember as significant, though at the time it seemed perfectly natural. Oh yes, on the way home today the engine overheated, he explained, his tone matter-of-fact. I dropped by the mechanic earlier just to check. That's why he's calling to confirm if it's all fixed and didn't overheat again. I nodded, accepting the explanation as Al always did. Marcus was the car person in our relationship. While I could change a tire if absolutely necessary, he handled all the automotive decisions from oil changes to major repairs. It made sense that he would deal with an overheating issue without bothering to mention it to me. Was it expensive? Al asked, settling back against him as the movie resumed. Not too bad. Just a coolant issue really. Tony's always been fair with his pricing. Marcus's arm tightened around me, and Al felt him press a gentle kiss to the top of me head. The gesture felt both loving and somehow apologetic, though I couldn't say why Al thought that at the time. We returned to the movie, but Al noticed that Marcus seemed less relaxed than before. His attention appeared divided, and Al caught him glancing at his phone several times during the next hour. When Al commented on a particularly funny moment in the film, his laugh seemed delayed, as if he'd been thinking about something else entirely. Everything okay at work? Al asked during a commercial break. You seem a little distracted. Just thinking about the car, he replied quickly. Want to make sure it's actually fixed before we rely on it for your work commute next week. It was a reasonable concern. I often had to be at the hospital for early morning shifts, and public transportation from our neighborhood was spotty at best. But something about his tone struck me as slightly off, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. At 4:45 p.m., Marcus began gathering his keys and wallet from the coffee table. I should head over to Tony's before he closes up for the day, he announced, standing and stretching. Want me to come with you? I offered, though I was comfortable in my spot on the couch and didn't really want to leave. No need, Marcus said, perhaps a bit too quickly. It'll just be a quick check. I'll be back within the hour. He leaned down to kiss me goodbye, a brief, distracted peck that felt more like obligation than affection. As he headed toward the door, I called out, "Drive carefully." "Always do," he replied, and then he was gone. Do you think he was really going to Tony's workshop? Let's find out. Maria Elena Rodriguez, a 29-year-old account coordinator at Midwest Insurance Partners. Maria had moved to Cleveland from Phoenix 18 months earlier for a job opportunity and a fresh start after a difficult breakup. I was intelligent, ambitious, and looking for stability after a series of relationships with men who had proven unreliable. When Elle met Marcus during the Morrison account negotiations, I was initially impressed by his professionalism and apparent maturity. He seemed different from the younger men Elle typically dated. More focused, more financially stable, more serious about building a future. Marcus told Maria that he was divorced, that his ex-wife lived in another state, and that he was looking for someone to share his life with. The lies came so easily and were delivered with such conviction that Maria never thought to question them. When Marcus suggested we keep our relationship private initially because of workplace policies, it seemed like reasonable discretion rather than suspicious secrecy. Maria genuinely cared for Marcus and believed I had found the kind of partnership I had been looking for. I was making plans for a future that included him, considering whether Al wanted to stay in Cleveland long-term based largely on our relationship. I remained on the couch, Whiskers now claiming Marcus's vacant spot, and tried to focus on the movie. But something nagged at a small voice in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite silence. It wasn't anything specific, just a feeling that something was slightly off-kilter in our perfectly ordered world. Al dismissed the feeling as my own anxiety. I'd always been prone to overthinking, a trait that served me well as a nurse but sometimes made me see problems none existed. Marcus was just being responsible, taking care of our car. It was one of the things Al loved about him. His reliability, his attention to practical matters. When he returned an hour later, that nagging feeling would only grow stronger. Hit that subscribe button for more interesting topics. The Tearful Return. At exactly 6:02 p.m., I heard Marcus's key in the front door. I was in the kitchen by then, having migrated there to start thinking about dinner, though I'd mostly been scrolling through my phone and playing with Whiskers, who had followed me in hopes of an early evening snack. "Hey honey, I'm back," Marcus called out, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of cheerfulness that seemed almost exaggerated. I looked up from my phone to see my husband practically bouncing into the kitchen, a broad smile stretched across his face. His eyes were bright, almost glowing, and there was an energy about him that seemed disproportionate to having simply gotten his car serviced. "Everything's fixed now," he announced, setting his keys on the counter with more flourish than the action warranted. "Engine is solid. Tony says it should run like new for years to come." "That's good. I'm glad," I replied, though I found myself studying his expression more carefully than I normally would. There was something about his demeanor that struck me as performative, like he was playing the role of relieved husband whose car troubles are over, rather than actually being that person. His smile seemed too wide, his enthusiasm too forced. It reminded me of the way he acted when he was trying to convince a difficult client to renew our insurance policy, professional charm layered over whatever he was really thinking. "How much did it end up costing?" Al asked, a reasonable question that any spouse would ask. Marcus's smile flickered for just a moment before returning full force. "Not bad at all. Under 200. Tony's a good guy, he doesn't overcharge like some of these opt-me shops around town." He moved around the kitchen with restless energy, opening the refrigerator unnecessarily, checking the mail that had already been sorted, straightening items that didn't need straightening. It was as if he couldn't quite settle down, couldn't find his normal rhythm. "You seem happy," I observed, watching him reorganize the fruit bowl for no apparent reason. "Just relieved," Marcus said, finally pausing in his busy work to meet my eyes. "You know how it is when something's wrong with the car. It's always in the back of your mind until it's fixed." I nodded, though I couldn't recall Marcus ever being this visibly affected by car troubles before. Usually he took automotive issues in stride, handling them with calm efficiency. This level of emotional investment seemed out of character. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like and comment. We spent the evening in what appeared to be domestic harmony, cooking dinner together, sharing stories from our respective weeks, watching a Netflix series we'd been following. But I found myself observing Marcus more closely than usual, noting the way he kept checking his phone even when we were in the middle of conversations, the way his attention seemed to drift even when I was telling him about a particularly challenging patient LD dealt with that week. "Dr. Martinez said the funniest thing yesterday," I was telling him as we cleaned up after dinner. "This elderly patient kept insisting that his four was making him feel like Superman, and Dr. Martinez." I looked over to see Marcus staring at his phone screen, completely absorbed in whatever message he was reading. "Marcus." He looked up with a start. "Sorry, what were you saying?" "Something about Dr. Martinez." I felt a familiar pang of hurt, the kind that comes when you realize someone you love isn't really listening to you. "Never mind. It wasn't important." "No, tell me," Marcus said, setting his phone face down on the counter. "I want to hear it." But the moment had passed and the story no longer seemed worth telling. Instead, I find loading the dishwasher in relative silence, that small voice in the back of my mind growing slightly louder. That night as we prepared for bed, Marcus seemed almost giddy. He hummed in the shower, told jokes while we brawled our teeth, and was more affectionate than he'd been in weeks. Under normal circumstances, I would have welcomed this return to our earlier dynamic. But something about the timing felt wrong, as if his good mood was connected to something other than our relationship. As we settled into bed, Marcus pulled me close and kissed me with more passion than LD experienced from him in months. "I love you, Sarah," he whispered against my ear. "I hope you know that." "I love you too," Elle replied, but even as Elle said it, Elle wondered why his declaration felt less like an expression of affection and more like an apology. Lay awake long after Marcus had fallen asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. Elle stared at the ceiling, trying to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship, even though I couldn't identify what that something might be. The cheerful, energetic man who had returned from the mechanic's shop felt like a stranger wearing my husband's face. And for the first time in our 7-year marriage, I found myself wondering if Elle really knew the man sleeping beside me at all. The awakening. 5 days passed in what seemed like normal routine. Marcus went to work each morning, kissed me goodbye with what appeared to be genuine affection, and returned home each evening with stories about difficult clients and office politics. I worked my shifts at the hospital, caring for patients and navigating the complex dynamics of the nursing staff. To any outside observer, The Thompsons appeared to be a typical suburban couple, navigating the ordinary challenges of married life. But my antenna for subtle changes had been raised, and I found myself noticing things that might have escaped my attention before. Marcus's phone habits, for instance, had shifted. Where he used to leave his device casually on counters or tables, he now kept it close to his person at all times. He took it with him to the bathroom, kept it on his nightstand facing down, and seemed to check it more frequently throughout the day. When I asked him about a text that had come in while we were watching TV together, he'd glance at the screen and dismiss it as work stuff or spam without showing me. His sleep patterns had changed too. Marcus had always been a solid sleeper, but lately he seemed restless, often getting up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom or get a glass of water. Sometimes I'd wake to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone with the brightness turned down low. On Thursday morning, the 5th day after the mechanic incident, I was in the laundry room folding towels when I heard the shower turn on in the adjacent bathroom. Marcus was getting ready for work, running slightly later than usual because he'd spent extra time at his morning workout. The familiar sounds of his routine, the shower running, the medicine cabinet opening and closing, the electric razor humming, created a domestic soundtrack that had always felt comforting to Sarah. This morning, however, that soundtrack was interrupted by the sharp ring of Marcus's phone. The device was sitting on the dresser in our bedroom, just visible from where I stood in the laundry room. The caller ID displayed Tony's auto repair again, and I felt a small chill run down my spine. "Marcus," I called out, raising my voice to be heard over the shower. "Your phone's ringing. It's the mechanic again." You will not believe his reaction. The response from the bathroom was immediate and startling in its intensity. "Don't answer it," Marcus shouted, his voice carrying a note of panic that seemed wildly disproportionate to the situation. I froze, a half-folded towel in my hands, struck by the harshness of his tone. In 7 years of marriage, Aldi never heard Marcus speak with such sharp urgency about something so mundane. Even when he'd been dealing with work crises or family emergencies, he maintained a level of calm control that was one of his defining characteristics. The phone continued to ring as I heard the shower shut off abruptly, followed by the sounds of Marcus hurriedly wrapping himself in a towel. He appeared in the bedroom doorway seconds later, water still dripping from his hair, his face filled with what looked like genuine anxiety. He stormed out moments later, towel wrapped around his waist, snatched the phone. Without a word to me, he grabbed the phone and stepped out onto our small second-floor balcony, sliding the door shut behind him. Through the glass, I could see him answering the call, his free hand gesturing in what appeared to be an animated conversation. Suspicion bloomed. I remained in the laundry room, but my hands had stopped folding. My heart was beating faster, and that small voice in the back of my mind had become a roar. There was absolutely no reasonable explanation for Marcus's behavior. If Tony the mechanic was calling about a legitimate car issue, why the panic? Why the secrecy? Al thought back to Saturday's call, remembering details that had seemed insignificant at the time. Marcus's momentary tension when the phone rang. The way he'd set it face down immediately after the call. His disproportionate cheerfulness when he returned from the shop. And now this, sneaking out to the balcony to take a call from the same number, acting as if answering his phone would somehow be catastrophic. When Marcus came back inside 10 minutes later, his demeanor had shifted again. The panic was gone, replaced by a forced casualness that felt even more suspicious than the anxiety had been. "Sorry about that," he said, toweling off his hair with studied nonchalance. "Tony had some questions about the warranty work." "Warranty work?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, apparently the coolant issue was covered under some manufacturer thing. He needed some information from me for the paperwork." Marcus was getting dressed as he spoke, not meeting my eyes, his movements quick and efficient. He seemed eager to finish the conversation and leave for work. "Why couldn't I answer it?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since he'd shouted from the shower. Marcus paused in the act of buttoning his shirt, finally looking at me directly. You know how Tony is. He's got that thick accent and he gets frustrated when he has to repeat himself. I figured it would be easier if I just talked to him directly. It was a plausible explanation, the kind of small consideration that a thoughtful husband might have for his wife. But everything about Marcus's delivery felt scripted, as if he'd been rehearsing the response while he was on the balcony. "Okay," I said simply, but Al made a mental note of the explanation and of how uncomfortable Marcus had looked while giving it. The rest of the morning proceeded normally. Marcus finished getting ready for work, kissed me goodbye and headed out to his car. But as I watched him drive away from our bedroom window, Al realized that my perspective on our marriage had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in 7 years I was actively suspicious of my husband. And more importantly, I had decided I was going to do something about it. The investigation begins. That evening, I found myself paying attention to Marcus's behavior with the focused intensity Al usually reserved for monitoring critical patients in the ICU. Every gesture, every word, every expression was catalogued and analyzed for hidden meaning. Marcus seemed to sense my scrutiny, though he couldn't have known its true purpose. He was more attentive than usual during dinner, asking detailed questions about my day at the hospital and sharing funny stories from his office. To anyone else, he would have appeared to be a devoted husband making an effort to connect with his wife after a busy day. But I noticed the way his eyes would dart to his phone whenever it buzzed with a notification, even though he didn't pick it up. Al observed how he kept checking his watch as if he were waiting for something or someone. Most telling, Al saw how his smile never quite reached his eyes, as if he were performing the role of loving husband, rather than actually being one. Around 9 p.m. as we settled in to watch the news, I excused myself to use the bathroom. But instead of heading to the downstairs powder room, Al quietly climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my heart pounding with the knowledge that I was about to cross a line LD never crossed before in our marriage. Marcus's reaction was subtle but telling. His eyes flickered with what looked like panic, quickly suppressed. His grip on his own phone tightened almost imperceptibly. "Actually," he said after a pause that lasted a beat too long, "I'm expecting some important calls from potential clients tomorrow. Big insurance policies, you know. I really need to have my phone with me." "Of course," I replied as if his refusal was perfectly reasonable. "I understand. Maybe I can get someone to cover for me so I can take mine to get fixed." "That sounds like a better plan," Marcus agreed, relief evident in his voice. But I wasn't done testing him yet. "You know what though," Al continued. "If my phone does die completely tomorrow and there is an emergency, I might need to call you from the hospital. Will you be in meetings all day or should I be able to reach you?" Another subtle pause. Another micro-expression of anxiety. "I have a few client meetings scheduled," Marcus said. "But you can always call. If I can't answer right away, I'll call back as soon as possible. What about lunchtime? I usually try to call you then anyway." "Lunch might be tricky tomorrow. I'm meeting with the Peterson, you know how demanding we are. Might run long." I nodded understandingly, filing away another piece of information. Marcus was creating alibis for times when he wouldn't be available, times when his attention would be focused elsewhere. That night as we prepared for bed, Sarah's mind was working overtime, formulating a plan. Al needed to know where Marcus really went when he claimed to be visiting Tony's auto repair. Al needed to understand the scope of his deception. And Al needed to do it in a way that would give my concrete, undeniable evidence. The plan that began forming in my mind was risky and would require perfect timing. But as Al lay in bed next to my husband, listening to him breathing peacefully while Al stared at the ceiling, I realized I was beyond worrying about risk. My marriage was already broken. Al just needed to prove it. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching Sarah's mood perfectly. Al watched Marcus go through his morning routine, noting how he kept his phone closer than usual, how he seemed more anxious than a typical workday would warrant. "Have a good day," he said, kissing my goodbye with what felt like performative affection. "You too," I replied. "Hope your meetings go well." As soon as Marcus's car disappeared around the corner, I put my plan into motion. Al called the hospital and reported that I was having car trouble and would be a few hours late. Then Al got into my car and drove to a position 3 blocks from Marcus's office building. I had a clear view of the parking garage exit but was unlikely to be spotted. At 10:47 a.m., Al saw Marcus's silver Honda Accord emerge from the garage and turn east toward the highway. I followed at a careful distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. I was about to discover where my husband really went when he lied to me about visiting the mechanic. And I had a terrible feeling that the truth was going to be worse than anything I had imagined. The truth revealed. I had never followed another car before, and the experience was more nerve-wracking than I had anticipated. Al tried to maintain enough distance to avoid detection while staying close enough to keep Marcus's Honda in sight. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, and Al found myself holding my breath at every traffic light. Marcus drove east through downtown Cleveland, then south toward the suburbs, taking a route that was definitely not leading to any legitimate business meeting. My nursing training had taught me to remain calm under pressure, but this was different. This was personal, and the stakes felt impossibly high. After 25 minutes of driving, Marcus turned into the parking lot of the Marriott Courtyard on Rockside Road, a mid-range business hotel that catered to corporate travelers and conferences. Sarah's heart sank as Elle watched him park near the lobby entrance and stride confidently through the front doors, moving like a man who knew exactly where he was going. Elle parked at the far end of the lot and sat in my car, staring at the hotel entrance and trying to process what I was witnessing. They were innocent explanations for Marcus being at a hotel at 11:15 on a Thursday morning. A business meeting, a conference, a lunch appointment. But combined with everything else LD discovered, Sarah's mind went immediately to the darkest possibility. My husband was having an affair. The realization hit me like a physical blow, even though part of me had been preparing for this possibility since LD spoken to Tony the mechanic. Still, having suspicions and having them confirmed were entirely different experiences. I sat in my car and felt 7 years of marriage crumble around me. Elle waited in the parking lot for 2 hours, watching the hotel entrance with the focused attention of a detective on a stakeout. At 1:23 p.m., Marcus emerged from the lobby, but he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a woman I had never seen before. Elle appeared to be in my early 30s with long dark hair and the kind of polished appearance that suggested Elle worked in a professional environment. I was attractive in a conventional way, but what struck me most was how comfortable Elle and Marcus looked together. They walked close to each other, our body language suggesting an intimacy that went far beyond casual acquaintance. Watched as Marcus opened the passenger door of his car for the woman, a gentlemanly gesture that he hadn't extended to me in years. I saw them share what looked like an intense conversation before the woman leaned over and kissed him. Not a brief, friendly peck, but a lingering kiss that left no doubt about the nature of our relationship. The woman got out of Marcus's car and walked to a red Toyota Camry parked nearby. I made note of the license plate number, though Elle wasn't sure what Elle would do with that information. As both cars left the hotel parking lot in different directions, I remained sitting in my own vehicle, trying to absorb the full impact of what I had witnessed. My husband of 7 years was having an affair. The man who had promised to love and honor me, who had held my hand through my mother's cancer diagnosis, who had talked about starting a family someday, was betraying our marriage in the most fundamental way possible. I drove home in a fog of shock and rage, my emotions cycling between devastation and fury. By the time Elle reached our house, I had made several important decisions. First, Elle wasn't going to confront Marcus immediately. Elle needed time to process what LD learned and to decide how Elle wanted to handle the situation. Second, I was going to gather more evidence. If this marriage was going to end, and I was beginning to think it was, Elle wanted to be fully informed about the extent of Marcus's deception. Third, I was going to make Marcus face the consequences of his choices, but I was going to do it on my own terms. That afternoon, I called my best friend Janet Morrison, a divorce attorney LV known since college. Janet? It's Sarah. I need to ask you some questions about divorce law in Ohio, and I need you to keep this conversation completely confidential. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah? Are you and Marcus having problems? It's complicated. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? I need advice and I need to understand my options. Of course. But Sarah, are you okay? You sound. I'm not okay, I admitted. But I will be. That evening, Marcus came home at his usual time carrying flowers, a gesture that might have seemed sweet if I hadn't known where he'd spent his afternoon. These are beautiful, Elle said, accepting the bouquet with what Elle hoped was a convincing smile. What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to buy flowers for my beautiful wife? Marcus replied, pulling me into an embrace that felt like a betrayal. I allowed myself to be held, even managed to return his kiss, though every fiber of my being wanted to pull away. The man holding me felt like a stranger now, someone wearing my husband's face while living a completely different life. How was your day? Elle asked, the same question Elle asked every evening, though now it carried the weight of a test. Busy, Marcus replied, moving around the kitchen in his familiar end-of-day routine. The Peterson meeting ran really long, just like I thought it would. Then I had to drive all the way across town for another appointment. Didn't even have time for lunch. I nodded, marveling at how easily the lies flowed from his lips. He was describing a day that bore no resemblance to the reality I had witnessed. No mention of the hotel, no acknowledgement of the woman he had kissed in the parking lot. "I'm sorry you had such a stressful day," Al said, my voice carefully neutral. "Maybe we should order takeout tonight so you can relax." "That sounds perfect," Marcus agreed, seeming genuinely pleased by my suggestion. "You're always so thoughtful, Sarah." "I don't tell you that enough." The compliment felt like salt in an open wound, but I managed to smile and suggest Chinese food from our usual place. That night, as we ate General Tso's chicken and watched a Netflix comedy that I couldn't focus on, I found myself studying Marcus with new eyes. How long had he been living this double life? How many other lies had Al accepted without question? How many times had he looked me in the eye and told me he loved me while simultaneously betraying everything our marriage was supposed to represent? The plan. The next morning, I met Janet Morrison at a small coffee shop in Shaker Heights, far enough from our neighborhood to avoid running into anyone we knew. Janet was already waiting at a corner table when I arrived, my expression concerned and professional. Janet Morrison had been Sarah's roommate during our junior year of college, and we had remained close friends despite taking very different career paths. When I had chosen nursing, a field focused on healing and caring for ATMIs, Janet had become a family law attorney, specializing in divorce cases. I was sharp, practical, and had seen enough broken marriages to recognize the signs of one falling apart. "You look terrible," Janet said without preamble as I sat down. "Tell me what's going on." I had rehearsed this conversation in my mind, but now that the moment had arrived, Al found it difficult to speak the words aloud. Saying them would make the situation real in a way that it hadn't been when it was just my private suspicion. "I think Marcus is having an affair," Al said finally, the words coming out in a rush. Janet's expression didn't change. Al-D heard similar statements from dozens of clients over the years. "What makes you think that?" I told her everything. The suspicious phone calls, the lies about the mechanic, my visit to Tony's shop, and finally yesterday's revelation at the hotel. With each detail, Janet's expression grew more serious. "Have you confronted him about any of this?" Janet asked when I finished my account. "No. I wanted to understand my legal position first. If this marriage is over, and I'm starting to think it is, I want to be smart about how I handle it." Janet nodded approvingly. "That's wise. Emotional decisions made in the heat of discovery often work against people in divorce proceedings. Tell me about your finances. Joint accounts? Property? Debts?" For the next hour, Janet walked me through the practical realities of divorce in Ohio. We discussed asset division, alimony possibilities, and the importance of documentation. Janet emphasized the value of evidence in establishing grounds for divorce and in negotiating a fair settlement. "The more concrete proof you have of his infidelity, the better your position will be," Janet explained. "Photos, documentation, witnesses. Affairs are hard to hide completely. There's usually a digital trail. How do I get that kind of evidence without becoming someone I don't want to be?" I asked. "I don't want to turn into some paranoid wife going through garbage and hiring private investigators." "You don't have to," Janet assured me. "Sometimes the cheating spouse provides the evidence themselves. We get careless, overconfident. We make mistakes." As we parted ways, Janet gave me a business card and a piece of advice that would prove prophetic. "Don't let anger make your decisions for you," she said. "But don't let him gaslight you either. Trust your instincts. We've been right so far." That afternoon I returned home with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer just a betrayed wife operating on suspicion and hurt feelings. I was a woman taking control of my situation, gathering information and preparing for whatever came next. Al spent the weekend observing Marcus with clinical detachment, noting patterns in his behavior that I had previously overlooked. He was more attentive than usual, bringing my coffee in bed Saturday morning and suggesting we take a walk through our neighborhood, behaviors that might have seemed loving if Al hadn't known we were likely motivated by guilt. Sunday evening, as we prepared for another week, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to give Marcus enough rope to hang himself with his own lies. "I've been thinking," Al said as we cleaned up after dinner. My phone is still acting up and I'm worried about missing important calls from work. Would it be okay if I added my number to your account as an authorized contact? That way if something happens to my phone, the hospital could reach me through your number if necessary. It was a reasonable request, the kind of practical arrangement that married couples made all the time. But I watched Marcus's reaction carefully, looking for signs that the suggestion made him uncomfortable. That's probably not necessary, Marcus said after a brief pause. I mean, when would the hospital not be able to reach you directly? I don't know, but Dr. Patterson was telling me about a nurse who missed a critical call because my phone died during an emergency. I just want to make sure I'm always reachable. Marcus seemed to consider this, his expression thoughtful but slightly strained. Let me think about it. There might be some privacy issues with work calls and things like that. I nodded as if his concern was perfectly reasonable, but internally I was cataloging another suspicious response. A faithful husband would have agreed to my request without hesitation. A man with something to hide would look for reasons to refuse. Of course, Al said. No rush. It was just a thought. That night, as Marcus slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake formulating a plan that was both simple and elegant. I was going to create a situation where Marcus's deception would be exposed not by my investigation, but by his own actions. I was going to make him call his mistress while I was listening. The plan would require careful timing and a bit of deception on my part, but I was beyond worrying about the moral implications of tricking my husband. He had forfeited his right to complete honesty when he started lying to me. All Al needed was the right opportunity. The trap is set. Tuesday morning arrived overcast and humid, the kind of oppressive Cleveland weather that made everyone slightly irritable. I had been awake since 5 a.m., running through my plan obsessively, checking and rechecking every detail. Today was the day Al would finally get the proof Al needed. Marcus seemed unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming while he read the news on his tablet and making jokes about the weather forecast. His good mood struck me as performative, too bright, too forced. Al wondered if he had plans to see his mistress today, if that was what had put the spring in his step. I'm going to be working late tonight, he announced as he gathered his briefcase and car keys. Big presentation tomorrow for a potential corporate client. Might not be home until after 9. I felt a familiar chill at another lie delivered with such casual confidence. That's fine. I'll probably just make something simple for dinner and catch up on my reading. Marcus kissed my goodbye, the gesture feeling more like an insult than affection, and headed out to his car. I watched from the living room window as he drove away, then immediately put my plan into motion. Al called the hospital and reported that I was having car trouble and would need to work from home that day, handling patient follow-up calls and updating medical records remotely. Then Al called a local phone store and inquired about getting a new number quickly, something Al might need depending on how the day unfolded. At 10 a.m. I positioned myself in the laundry room adjacent to our master bathroom and waited. If Marcus followed his recent pattern, he would receive or make a suspicious call sometime before lunch, and if he was home he would likely take that call in the privacy of the bathroom or step outside. But today Marcus wasn't home. Today I was going to intercept his communication in a different way. At 11:30 a.m., Al heard the familiar ring of Marcus's phone coming from upstairs. But that was impossible. Marcus had his phone with him at work. The ringing was coming from the house phone, our landline that we rarely used except for doctors' offices and delivery services. I climbed the stairs quickly, following the sound to our bedroom, when I discovered an old smartphone charging on Marcus's side of the nightstand. It was a device LD never seen before, hidden behind a lamp where it wouldn't be immediately visible. My husband had a second phone. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. A secret phone meant premeditation. It meant Marcus hadn't just fallen into an affair. He had planned for it, set up systems to hide it, invested time and money in maintaining his deception. The phone had stopped ringing by the time I reached it, but the missed call notification was still visible on the lock screen. The caller ID showed M. Rodriguez. I stared at the device, my mind racing. Al needed to document this, but Al also needed to be careful. If Marcus discovered that Al knew about the secret phone, he would likely destroy the evidence and become even more careful about hiding his tracks. Al quickly took photos of the phone with my own device, making sure to capture the missed call notification and the phone's location in our bedroom. Then Al carefully returned it to its position behind the lamp and went downstairs to think. Second phone changed everything. It meant Marcus's deception was far more elaborate than I had imagined. It suggested a level of planning and investment in his affair that made reconciliation seem impossible. But it also gave me an opportunity. That evening, Marcus arrived home at 9:15 p.m., full of stories about his presentation preparation and apologies for working so late. I listened to his lies with detached fascination, marveling at his ability to maintain such elaborate fiction. "How was your day?" he asked as we settled in to watch the late news. "Quiet," I replied. "I worked from home, had some car trouble this morning, but I got it sorted out." Al watched Marcus's face carefully as Al mentioned car trouble, looking for any reaction that might suggest he was thinking about his own fictional automotive problems. But his expression remained neutral, concerned only in the way any husband would be about his wife's transportation issues. "Is everything okay with the car now?" he asked. "Oh yes, it was just a minor thing. Actually, it's funny, I ended up having to call a mechanic and it reminded me of when you had that overheating problem last week. Small world, how often car troubles seem to come up." I delivered this observation with casual innocence, but I was studying Marcus's reaction intently. I saw a flicker of something, anxiety, guilt, cross his features before he recovered his composure. "Yeah, it does seem like these things come in waves sometimes," he agreed, his voice carefully neutral. That night, as Marcus showered before bed, I made my move. Al crept upstairs to our bedroom and checked the secret phone. There were several text messages from Rodriguez, and my heart pounded as Al read them. "Missing you today. When can we meet again? Thinking about this afternoon. You make me so happy. Can you get away Thursday? Same place." I took screenshots of every message, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and vindication. That was the proof Al needed, the concrete evidence of Marcus's betrayal. The messages were intimate, ongoing, and left no doubt about the nature of his relationship with Rodriguez. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more phase of my plan to execute, one final trap that would expose Marcus's lies in a way he couldn't deny or explain away. Tomorrow morning I was going to make him call his mistress while Al listened. The perfect execution. Wednesday morning dawned clear and bright, a sharp contrast to the storm that was brewing in the Thompson household. I had been awake since 4 a.m., mentally rehearsing every step of what I was about to do. There would be no second chances. Al needed to execute my plan perfectly. Marcus seemed relaxed at breakfast, reading emails on his phone and discussing his schedule for the day. He mentioned a lunch meeting with a potential client and a conference call that might run late, creating his usual alibis for time that would be unaccounted for. "Oh, before I forget," I said as Marcus prepared to leave for work, "I'm having that phone issue again. The screen went completely black last night and won't turn back on." Marcus looked up from his briefcase with what appeared to be genuine concern. "That's not good. Did you try restarting it?" "I tried everything I could think of. I think it might be completely dead." I paused, then delivered the key line of my plan with perfect casualness. "I was hoping I could borrow your phone today, just in case the hospital needs to reach me for any emergencies." Al watched Marcus's face carefully, looking for the telltale signs of panic I had observed before. We were there. A slight tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible pause before he responded. "Actually, I really need my phone today. That conference call I mentioned is with some important clients, and I'll need to access my calendar and email throughout the day." "Of course," I said understandingly. "I figured that might be the case. Maybe I'll just work from home again today and use the landline if anything urgent comes up." Relief flickered across Marcus's features. "That sounds like a better plan. You can get your phone looked at when you have a chance." After Marcus left for work, I immediately went upstairs to check the secret phone. As I had hoped, there were new messages from Rodriguez. "Good morning, handsome. Can't wait to see you today. Same time, same place? Bring your appetite. I made reservations at that Italian place you like." I photographed the messages, then returned the phone to its hiding place. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Marcus was definitely meeting his mistress today and I had documentation of our planned rendezvous. At 11 a.m. I called my own phone from the landline, letting it ring just long enough to verify that it was indeed working perfectly. Then Al deliberately poured a small amount of water on the device, just enough to make the screen flicker and appear damaged. At 11:30 a.m., I'll position myself in the kitchen where I could see the driveway through the window. At 12:15 p.m., Al saw Marcus's Honda pull up to the house. This was unexpected. Marcus rarely came home during lunch and he had mentioned being busy with meetings all day. But Sarah's suspicion proved correct when Al saw him hurrying toward the house with his phone in his hand, clearly intending to make a call in private. I quickly grabbed my broken phone and positioned myself near the front door. When Marcus entered, I was ready. "Marcus. Thank goodness you're here," Al exclaimed, holding up my phone with its flickering screen. "My phone just completely died when I was trying to call Mom about my doctor's appointment. It's totally blank now. I need yours to call my, please." Marcus froze in the doorway, his own phone clutched in his hand. I could see the conflict playing out across his features. He had clearly come home to make a private call, but now I was asking to use his phone for what appeared to be a legitimate emergency. I just stopped by to grab some paperwork," he said, his voice slightly strained. "Maybe you could call your mom later?" "It's about my test results," I pressed, infusing my voice with just the right amount of urgency. "She's been waiting all morning to hear from me, and you know how Elle worries. It will just take a minute." Marcus looked at his phone, then at Sarah, clearly calculating his options. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he handed over the device. "Make it quick," he said. "I need to get back to the office." I took his phone with trembling hands, hardly believing that my plan was actually working. "Thank you so much. I'll just be a second." Instead of calling my mom, I navigated to Marcus's contacts list. Al scrolled down to mechanic, the same contact name that had appeared on all those suspicious calls, and pressed the call button. My own phone, hidden in the kitchen drawer, began to ring. But I had made one crucial addition to my plan. The night before, while Marcus was sleeping, I had changed the mechanic contact in his phone. I had deleted the original number and replaced it with my own. Now, when Marcus tried to call his mistress, he would be calling his wife instead. I let the call ring several times before answering, keeping my voice neutral and curious. "Hello." Marcus, who had been pacing anxiously in the hallway, suddenly stopped moving. I could see confusion spread across his face as he recognized my voice coming through his own phone. "Why do you sound different tonight?" he said automatically, clearly repeating words he had said before. For a moment I almost thought I dialed my wife's number by mistake, but I checked and it's your number. His voice trailed off as the implications of the situation began to dawn on him. I watched as understanding and horror crawled over his features in waves. "Yes, it is your wife speaking," I said, my voice deadly calm. "You think you're clever, pretending to be visiting the mechanic with the car every now and then. Well, I'm MYE, the new mechanic waiting for you. Come inside." Marcus stood frozen in our hallway, the phone still pressed to his ear, staring at his wife with the expression of a man whose entire world had just collapsed around him. His hands began to shake and I could see him struggling to process what had just happened. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing and the distant hum of our refrigerator. 7 years of marriage reduced to this moment of absolute truth. "Sarah," Marcus finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can explain." But I had heard enough lies to last a lifetime. "The reckoning." "Explain?" I repeated, my voice carrying a deadly quiet that Marcus had never heard before. Al ended the call and set his phone down on the hallway table with deliberate care. "Explain how you've been lying to my face for weeks. Explain the hotel meetings. Explain M. Rodriguez." Marcus's face went completely white at the mention of the name. His legs seemed to give out and he sank down onto the stairs, his head in his hands. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice muffled. "Long enough to confirm that my husband is a stranger." I remained standing, looking down at the man I had once planned to spend my life with. "I know about the secret phone, Marcus. I know about the fake mechanic calls. I followed you to the Marriott last Thursday." Marcus looked up sharply. "You followed me? What choice did you give me? When someone you love starts lying about everything, you have to find out the truth somehow." Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could see tears beginning to form in my eyes. "How long, Marcus? How long have you been cheating on me?" The question hung in the air between them, the final barrier between the lie Marcus had been living and the truth he could no longer avoid. 3 months, he said finally, his voice barely audible. "It started 3 months ago. I felt the number hit me like a physical blow. 3 months. 3 months of coming home to my every evening, cooking dinner together, sharing our bed, making plans for the future. 3 months of I love yous, and anniversary planning and casual intimacy, all while he was building another life with another woman. Who is she? I asked, though Al wasn't sure Al really wanted to know. Maria Rodriguez. She works at the insurance company we partnered with on the Morrison account. We started talking during the negotiations and then you decided your marriage vows didn't matter anymore? Marcus flinched at the accusation. It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned. We just connected, and before you knew it, you were lying to me every single day. My composure was beginning to crack, 7 years of love and trust transforming into fury. Before you knew it, you were getting secret phones and fake mechanic appointments and hotel rooms. Sarah, please let me explain how it happened. I don't care how it happened. The words exploded out of my months of suppressed suspicion and hurt finally finding my voice. I don't care about your feelings or your connection or how it just happened. You made a choice, Marcus. Every single day for 3 months, you made the choice to betray me. Marcus was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he sat hunched on the staircase. I know I screwed up. But Sarah, I love you. I've always loved you. This thing with Maria, it's not what we have. What we have, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What we have is built on lies. What we have is me trusting you while you meet another woman in hotel rooms. What we have is 7 years of marriage that apparently meant nothing to you. It meant everything to me, Marcus protested, reaching for my hand. Sarah, this was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. I stepped back, avoiding his touch. How you feel about me? You feel so much about me that you've been planning elaborate deceptions to spend time with another woman. You bought a secret phone, Marcus. You created fake contact names and lied about car trouble and looked me in the eye every single night while living a completely different life. The weight of his betrayal seemed to be sinking in as Marcus listened to his own actions laid out in stark terms. I know how it looks. It doesn't just look like anything, Marcus. This is what it is. This is what you chose. We stood in the hallway, the same space where we had hung family photos and discussed weekend plans and shared thousands of ordinary married moments, and I felt the finality of the situation settling over me like a shroud. I want you to leave, Elle said quietly. Sarah, please, we can work through this. We can go to counseling, I want you to pack a bag and leave. Tonight. I need time to think, and I can't do that with you. Marcus looked at me desperately. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, Marcus. Maybe Maria has some suggestions. The cruelty of the comment surprised even Sarah, but Elle found Elle didn't regret it. I had earned the right to be cruel. I had earned the right to not care about Marcus's comfort or convenience. Can we at least talk about this tomorrow? When we've both had time to calm down. I considered the question. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to cling to the possibility that our marriage could somehow survive this revelation. But a larger part of me, the part that had been growing stronger since Elle first suspected his deception, knew that some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome. We can talk, Elle agreed. But not about reconciliation. We can talk about how we're going to end this marriage with whatever dignity we have left. Marcus's face crumpled at my words, the finality of them clearly hitting him for the first time. Sarah, please don't say that. Please don't give up on us. You gave up on us 3 months ago, I replied. I'm just acknowledging reality. The affair with Maria Rodriguez began as Marcus had told Sarah, during business negotiations. But what he hadn't explained was how the relationship fed his ego in ways that his marriage no longer did. With Maria, he could be the exciting, spontaneous version of himself that felt constrained by domestic routine. With Maria, he could pretend to be single, unburdened by mortgage payments and household responsibilities. The secret phone and elaborate deceptions weren't just practical necessities, we were part of the thrill. Marcus discovered that he enjoyed the complexity of maintaining 2 different lives, the challenge of keeping his stories straight, the rush of risk that came with almost getting caught. By the time I discovered his betrayal, Marcus had become so invested in his double life that he had lost sight of what he was risking. The stable, loving marriage that had once seemed like his greatest achievement had become something he took for granted, while the exciting uncertainty of his affair had become addictive. The aftermath. Marcus packed a suitcase that evening with mechanical precision, moving through our bedroom like a sleepwalker. I watched from the doorway, noting which items he chose to take and which he left behind. He packed his work clothes and basic necessities, but left the personal items that had accumulated over 7 years of marriage. Photos, books, the coffee mug I had given him for our 3rd anniversary. The secret phone went with him, though I had already documented its contents thoroughly. Al wondered if he would call Maria from whatever hotel he ended up in tonight, if he would tell Mai about the discovery and the confrontation. Al wondered if Maria even knew that Marcus was married, or if I was another victim of his capacity for deception. "I'll call you tomorrow," Marcus said as he stood in our front doorway with his suitcase. "Maybe we can meet somewhere neutral to talk." I nodded, though Al wasn't sure what we would have to discuss beyond the logistics of separation. The fundamental question, whether our marriage could survive this betrayal, had already been answered in my heart. After Marcus left, I called Janet Morrison. "It's over," Al said without preamble when my friend answered. "I caught him. I have evidence. I want to file for divorce." "Are you sure?" Janet asked gently. "I know this is a shock, but sometimes couples can work through. He had a secret phone, Janet. He's been planning this deception for months. There's no coming back from that level of betrayal." Janet was quiet for a moment. "Can you come in tomorrow? We'll start the paperwork." That night, I slept alone in our bed for the first time in 7 years. Al expected to feel devastated, to cry myself to sleep or lie awake replaying every moment of our relationship. Instead, Al felt oddly peaceful. The uncertainty was over. The constant low-level anxiety of knowing something was wrong but not being able to identify it had finally lifted. The truth, as painful as it was better than living a lie. Over the next few days, I began the process of untangling a shared life. Al called our joint credit card companies to check for charges Al didn't recognize, and found several restaurant bills from places I had never been, hotel charges on days when Marcus claimed to be working late. Al contacted our bank to understand our asset situation and was relieved to discover that we had kept separate retirement accounts. Marcus called every day as promised, but our conversations were stilted and practical. He had taken a temporary apartment across town. He wanted to know about mail forwarding and where Al needed help with any household repairs. He asked repeatedly if we could meet to really talk about what happened, but I wasn't ready for that conversation. The hardest part was telling people. Sarah's mom cried when she heard the news, asking repeatedly if I was sure Al wanted to end my marriage over one mistake. Friends responded with shock, confusion, and in some cases, our own stories of suspected or discovered infidelity. Several people asked if I had considered counseling or mediation, as if 3 months of elaborate deception was a problem that could be solved with better communication. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I agreed to meet Marcus at a coffee shop in neutral territory. He looked haggard, as if he hadn't been sleeping well, and Al felt a brief pang of sympathy before remembering why we were here. "How are you doing?" he asked as we sat across from each other at a small table. "I'm surviving," I replied honestly. "How's Maria?" Marcus winced at the directness of the question. I ended it. The day after everything happened. I told her it was over. "Because you got caught or because you realized it was wrong?" "Both," Marcus admitted. "Mostly because I realized what I was throwing away." I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I now knew he was capable of. "What you threw away, Marcus?" Past tense. "You can't undo 3 months of lies." "I know I can't undo it. But I can spend the rest of my life making up for it." "To who?" "To me." "Why would you want to spend your life making up for something to someone you were willing to betray for 3 months? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, apparently struggling to find an answer. "Because I love you," he said finally. "Because you're my wife and my partner and the person I want to grow old with." "Those are nice words," I replied. "But we don't match your actions. The person you want to grow old with is someone you respect enough not to lie to. The person you love is someone whose feelings you consider before you make major life decisions." I wasn't thinking clearly. "You were thinking clearly enough to buy a secret phone. You were thinking clearly enough to create elaborate cover stories. You were thinking clearly enough to plan hotel meetings and romantic dinners with another woman." I leaned forward, my voice intense but controlled. "Don't insult my intelligence by claiming this was all just thoughtless behavior." Marcus fell silent, apparently recognizing that his attempts at minimizing his actions weren't working. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. I want you to sign the divorce papers without making this process any more painful than it has to be, I said. I want you to be fair about the asset division and not try to drag this out or make it complicated. And that's it? 7 years of marriage and you just want it to be over. I considered the question seriously. Marcus, answer this honestly. If our situations were reversed, if I had been the one having a secret affair for 3 months, lying to you every single day, meeting someone else in hotel rooms while pretending to love you, would you want to stay married to me? Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. I thought so, I said softly. This isn't about punishment or revenge. This is about recognizing that some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. You didn't just cheat on me, Marcus. You rewrote our entire reality for 3 months. You made me live in a lie without my consent. We parted that day with an understanding that our marriage was over, but without the bitter acrimony that often accompanies such endings. I felt sad for what we had lost, but Elle also felt something else. Relief that Elle would never again have to wonder if the person Elle loved was lying to me. The discovery that Marcus was married came as a devastating shock. When he called the day after Sarah's confrontation, Maria's first emotion was not anger but humiliation. I had been unknowingly participating in the destruction of another woman's marriage, believing I was building something honest while actually living a lie. Maria ended the relationship immediately and considered transferring to another office to avoid the awkwardness of working with Marcus. But ultimately, Elle decided to stay and let him be the one to feel uncomfortable. I had done nothing wrong except trust someone who turned out to be untrustworthy. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of what had been our shared bedroom, now transformed into my personal sanctuary. The walls that had once held photos of Mai and Marcus now displayed artwork I had chosen myself. Vibrant paintings that reflected my own taste rather than the compromises of married life. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. Marcus had been fair about the asset division as I had requested, and had not fought the proceedings. He had sent a letter through his attorney expressing his regret and asking if we could maintain some kind of friendship, but I had declined. Some chapters needed to end completely. I had kept the house, using my share of our joint savings for the down payment on Marcus's portion of the equity. It felt good to own something entirely, to make decisions about paint colors and furniture placement without having to consider anyone else's preferences. My phone, my real phone, not the damaged prop I had used in my elaborate trap, buzzed with a text message. It was from Janet Morrison. How are you doing, divorced lady? Better than I expected, I typed back. Different but better. And it was true. The I who had discovered my husband's betrayal 6 months ago had been devastated by the collapse of everything Elle thought Elle knew about my life. But this Sarah, the one who had navigated the legal system and the emotional aftermath and the practical challenges of rebuilding a life from scratch, felt stronger than Elle ever had. I had learned things about myself during the divorce process that marriage had never taught me. I had discovered that I was capable of surviving betrayal, of making difficult decisions, of starting over at 34. I had learned that I could trust my instincts, that the small voice in the back of my mind was usually right when it told me something was wrong. Most importantly, I had learned that being alone was not the same as being lonely. There had been difficult days, of course. Days when Elle missed the companionship of marriage, the comfort of shared routines and inside jokes. Days when Elle wondered if I had been too hasty, too unforgiving, too willing to throw away 7 years for 3 months of mistakes. But those doubts never lasted long. Because I remembered the feeling of living with constant low-level anxiety, of knowing something was wrong but not being able to identify it. Elle remembered the sick feeling of discovering lie after lie, each one revealing new depths to Marcus's deception. And Elle remembered the peace that had come with finally knowing the truth. The house felt different now, lighter somehow despite being occupied by only one person instead of 2. I had redecorated slowly and deliberately, choosing each element to reflect my own taste and personality. The living room where I had once rested my head on Marcus's lap while watching movies was now arranged around a reading chair I had bought for myself, positioned to catch the afternoon light perfectly. I had started dating again tentatively and carefully. The betrayal had left me more cautious about trust, more alert to inconsistencies in behavior or story. But it had also clarified what Elle wanted in a partner. Someone whose words matched our actions, whose life was an open book rather than a carefully constructed fiction. Most evenings I came home to a house that was entirely my own, made myself dinner according to my own preferences, and settled in to read or watch movies I had chosen. It was a quieter life than the one I had shared with Marcus, but it was an honest one. And after months of living with lies, I had discovered that honesty, even when it came with loneliness, was a price I was willing to pay. The elaborate trap I had set to catch my husband in his deception had worked perfectly, but its greatest value hadn't been in exposing his betrayal. Its greatest value had been in teaching me that I was clever enough, strong enough, and determined enough to uncover truth and fight for what I deserved. As the sun set over Cleveland, casting long shadows through the windows of my house, I smiled. Tomorrow was my day off from the hospital, and I had plans to try a new hiking trail with a group I had joined. Next weekend I was driving to visit my college roommate in Chicago. Next month, Al signed up for a photography class I had always wanted to take. The future stretched ahead of me, unmarked by anyone else's expectations or deceptions. It was a future I would write myself, in truth rather than fiction, in daylight rather than shadow. And for the first time in months I was genuinely excited to see what came next. 1 year later, Maria started dating a colleague from a different department. Someone who had never been married and whose life was an open book. I had learned to ask more questions, to verify stories, and to trust my instincts when something felt off. The experience with Marcus had taught me that charm and apparent stability were not the same as character, and that the most dangerous lies were the ones that contained just enough truth to be believable. Tony Ricci, the real Tony Ricci, owner of Tony's Auto Repair on East 55th Street, never learned about his unwitting role in Marcus Thompson's deception. When I had visited his shop to verify my husband's story, Tony had been genuinely confused by my questions about warranty work and recent Honda repairs. A second-generation mechanic who had inherited the business from his father, Tony prided himself on honest dealing and fair pricing. He had been working on cars for over 30 years and had built a reputation in the neighborhood for trustworthy service. His customer base was largely word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated his straightforward approach. If Tony had known that someone was using his business name to cover up an extramarital affair, he would have been both angry and confused. His shop was a place where people brought our cars when we needed help, not a cover story for deception and betrayal. The irony was that Marcus had chosen Tony's shop specifically because it represented the kind of honest, uncomplicated business relationship that was the opposite of his own duplicitous behavior. In Marcus's mind, visiting the mechanic seemed like the perfect cover story because it was mundane, necessary, and unlikely to arouse suspicion. He never considered that his wife might actually call the shop to verify his story. The character I represents the many individuals who find themselves questioning our own perceptions when faced with a partner's deception. My journey from trusting wife to determined investigator illustrates the difficult but necessary process of reclaiming one's agency in the face of betrayal. The trap I sets for Marcus serves as both plot device and metaphor. Sometimes the only way to expose a liar is to give them the opportunity to lie so elaborately that we trap themselves. My method was non-violent, non-destructive, and ultimately revealed the truth without causing harm to anyone except through the natural consequences of Marcus's own choices. This story is a reminder that trust, once broken by systematic deception, is extremely difficult to rebuild. While some marriages can survive infidelity, the additional elements of gaslighting, elaborate planning, and ongoing lies create a foundation too damaged to support a healthy relationship. Most importantly, Sarah's story demonstrates that discovering a partner's betrayal, while devastating, can also be the beginning of reclaiming one's life and self-worth. The end of a dishonest marriage can be the start of an authentic life. Sarah's story reminds us that while love is important in marriage, it is not sufficient. Trust, honesty, and respect are equally crucial, and when these foundations are compromised, even the deepest love may not be enough to save the relationship. In the end, I chose myself. Al chose truth over comfort, uncertainty over deception, and personal growth over familiar pain. It was not an easy choice, but it was the right one. Cheating destroys marriages not because of the act itself, but because of the deceit. Once discovered, nothing remains the same. Marcus thought he was clever, disguising Maria as a mechanic. But deception, like oil on water, always rises to the surface. Me. I walked away with scars, yes, but also strength. The kind of strength you never know you have until you're forced to face the truth. Stay faithful. Stay honest. Because the cost of betrayal is always greater than the thrill of secrecy. Remember to subscribe for more interesting topics.